Someone still thinks of you, not because you promised forever, not because you stayed, not because you were perfect, but because you showed them what tenderness truly is. And once a human heart learns that language, it never forgets it. Tenderness leaves a fingerprint deeper than passion, louder than words, stronger than memory itself. It becomes a quiet reference point the soul returns to when the world grows sharp and love starts to feel transactional. You may not realize it, but there are moments of you that live on in someone else's ordinary days. Not the dramatic moments, not the grand gestures, just the way you softened your voice when they were overwhelmed, the way you listened without rushing to fix. The way you stayed present when it would have been easier to look away. Those moments became shelter. And shelter, once experienced, becomes sacred. They think of you in small, unexpected ways. When they see someone else try to love loudly but fail to love gently. When they notice how rare it is for someone to ask, "Are you okay?" and actually wait for the answer. When they're tired of being strong and remember how, with you, they didn't have to be. You showed them that tenderness is not weakness, it is strength with its guard down. What you gave wasn't flashy. It didn't demand applause. It didn't come with conditions. It came quietly, like a hand reaching out in the dark and staying there long enough for fear to calm. That kind of love doesn't expire when people part ways. It settles into memory and becomes a standard, a silent measure against which all future connections are compared. Someone out there still remembers how safe they felt around you. Safety is not something most people experience often. The world teaches us to brace ourselves, to expect disappointment, to armor our hearts. You did the opposite. You made space. You made room for vulnerability. You didn't weaponize their truths or rush their healing. You treated their softness as something precious, not inconvenient, and now, even if time has passed, even if life has pulled you both in different directions, they still think of you when they need to remind themselves that gentle love exists. When they start to believe that relationships are meant to hurt, they remember you. When they feel unseen, they remember how you noticed the little things. When they doubt their worth, they remember how you never made them earn your kindness. Tenderness changes people. It rewires the nervous system. It teaches the heart to relax. You may never hear about the ways you changed them, but the change is there. Maybe they learned to speak more kindly to themselves because you once spoke kindly to them. Maybe they learned to slow down because you showed them patience. Maybe they learned to love differently because you proved that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. There is someone who still carries your influence in the way they love others now. They may not say your name, but your imprint is present in their gentler touch, their softer words, their deeper listening. You became a reference point for what care looks like when it's sincere. And that is no small thing. You might wonder if what you gave mattered, especially if the story didn't end the way you hoped. But tenderness is never wasted. It doesn't disappear just because a connection ends. It continues quietly, echoing through someone's choices, shaping how they respond to pain, teaching them that they are worthy of kindness. There are people who will forget arguments, forget dates, forget promises, but they never forget how you made them feel when they were vulnerable. They never forget the person who treated their heart gently when it was exposed. You were that person for someone. And that memory still lives, warm and steady, long after everything else has faded. Sometimes they compare others to you, not because they want you back, but because you set a standard that is difficult to meet. You showed them that love doesn't rush, doesn't pressure, doesn't demand performance. You showed them that care can be calm, that affection can be consistent, that presence can be healing. Once someone experiences that, they cannot unknow it. You may not be in their life anymore, but you are in their understanding of love. And that is a powerful place to be. You became part of their inner compass. When something feels wrong, they remember how right it once felt with you. When something feels cold, they remember your warmth. When something feels conditional, they remember your acceptance. There is a quiet dignity in the way tenderness lingers. It doesn't shout for recognition. It doesn't chase validation. It simply remains. It waits patiently inside memory, offering comfort on difficult days. And on nights when loneliness feels heavy, they remember how it felt to be held, emotionally, not just physically, by someone who genuinely cared. You may never know how many times your kindness saved them from feeling completely alone. How many times your gentleness became the reason they didn't harden their heart. How many times your compassion reminded them that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Those things rarely come with thank you notes. They live quietly in someone's survival, and even now, in moments when life overwhelms them, there is a softness they learned from you that returns. A breath they take a little deeper. A moment they pause instead of reacting. A kindness they extend instead of withholding. You planted that seed without even trying. That is what tenderness does. It teaches without lecturing. If you ever doubt your impact, remember this: people don't miss chaos, they don't long for confusion, they don't reminisce about inconsistency. They miss peace. They miss being understood. They miss being treated gently. If someone still thinks of you, it's because you gave them something rare in a harsh world. You didn't have to save them. You didn't have to fix them. You simply had to be kind in a way that felt safe. And that was enough to leave a permanent mark. That was enough to be remembered. There is strength in being remembered for tenderness. It means you loved with integrity. It means you showed up with sincerity. It means you allowed yourself to be soft in a world that often rewards hardness. And even if that softness wasn't protected the way it deserved, it still mattered. Someone still thinks of you when they see a gentle gesture and feel their chest tighten with familiarity. When they experience a rare moment of emotional safety and think, this feels like that. When they wish they could say thank you for teaching them what kindness feels like when it's real, you may have moved on. You may have grown. You may be learning to protect your own tenderness now. But know this, what you gave did not disappear. It became part of someone else's emotional foundation. It became proof that love can be warm, patient, and humane, and that is a legacy far greater than staying. That is the quiet immortality of tenderness, and even as time stretches forward, even as names change and seasons turn, that tenderness you offered keeps finding ways to resurface in their life. It appears when they choose softness over defensiveness, when they hesitate before raising their voice, when they decide to listen instead of assume. They may not consciously trace those moments back to you, but the root is there. You taught their heart a rhythm it still follows. There are nights when they lie awake, not missing you exactly, but missing the version of themselves they were allowed to be with you. The unguarded one. The one who didn't have to perform strength or hide uncertainty. You made it okay to be human in a way that felt rare and relieving. That freedom is hard to forget. Once someone experiences it, the absence of it becomes noticeable everywhere else. You were gentle in a world that often confuses love with intensity. You didn't mistake control for care or drama for depth. You understood that real connection lives in consistency, in the way someone shows up on ordinary days, in the way they respond when there is nothing to gain. That understanding was a gift, even if it wasn't fully recognized at the time. Someone still thinks of you when they encounter affection that feels rushed or hollow. When words come easily but presence does not. When promises are made but not backed by patience. You taught them that tenderness is felt, not announced. And once someone learns that difference, they can't unlearn it. You may never know how often your kindness became the reason they didn't settle for less. How often they walked away from situations that felt cold because they knew warmth existed. How often they paused and thought, love didn't feel like this before, and chose to honor that memory rather than betray it. Even the way they comfort others now carries echoes of you. The way they check in. The way they give space without abandoning. The way they hold silence without making it heavy. These are learned behaviors, absorbed quietly through being treated with care. You became a teacher without ever standing at a podium. Sometimes tenderness is misunderstood. It can be overlooked, undervalued, mistaken for something that will always be there. And perhaps that's what happened. But what's overlooked in the moment often becomes the most cherished in hindsight. Distance has a way of clarifying what presence could not. There is no regret in the way they think of you, only a soft appreciation. A recognition that what you gave was real. That it mattered. That it shaped them. You are not a wound in their memory, you are a warmth. And warmth is something the soul instinctively seeks when life grows cold. You showed them that care does not need to be earned through pain. That affection does not have to be conditional. That being seen does not require being loud. These lessons settle deep, far beyond the surface of memory. They become part of how a person understands themselves and others, and even if your paths never cross again, even if your lives become entirely separate stories, there is a quiet thread connecting you through that shared understanding. A moment in time where tenderness existed freely, honestly, without agenda. That moment still lives. You may wonder if being gentle cost you something. Maybe it did. But it also gave something far greater. It gave someone proof that love can be safe. And that proof is something they carry with them, consciously or not, into every connection that follows. Someone still thinks of you not with longing, but with gratitude. Not with pain, but with respect. Because you didn't take from them, you gave. You didn't diminish them, you affirmed them. You didn't harden them, you softened them, and in a world that can be so sharp, so hurried, so unkind, that kind of influence is extraordinary. You may never receive recognition for it. You may never hear the words. But the impact remains, quietly alive, quietly meaningful. Tenderness does not demand to be remembered. It simply is. And that is why it lasts, and still, tenderness continues its quiet work long after goodbyes are spoken. It doesn't end when conversations stop or when lives no longer overlap. It settles into the deeper layers of memory, the places that don't need reminders to stay alive. You became part of that place for someone. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. There are moments when they surprise themselves by reacting differently than they once would have. When patience comes more easily. When compassion shows up before judgment. When they pause instead of retreating. In those moments, they are unknowingly carrying you forward. What you modeled became something they absorbed, something that reshaped the way they move through the world. You were proof that tenderness can exist without strings. That care doesn't have to be strategic. That love doesn't need to wound in order to feel deep. And once a person experiences that kind of sincerity, something inside them refuses to settle for cruelty disguised as passion ever again. They think of you when they see someone struggling and feel the urge to be gentle instead of indifferent. When they recognize pain behind someone's silence. When they choose kindness even when it would be easier to walk away. Those choices are not random. They come from having once been treated with grace. There is also a quiet ache that sometimes accompanies the memory of you, not the ache of loss, but the ache of recognition. The understanding that what you offered was rare. That not everyone knows how to love without taking, how to be present without controlling, how to care without needing to be needed. That recognition stays. You didn't rush their healing. You didn't compete with their wounds. You didn't make their vulnerability a burden. You honored it. And that kind of respect leaves a deep imprint. It teaches someone that their emotions are not inconveniences. That their softness is not something to be corrected. Even if they never say it out loud, there is gratitude in the way they remember you. Gratitude for the calm you brought into their life. Gratitude for the way you didn't make them prove their worth. Gratitude for the moments where they felt fully accepted, exactly as they were. You may not realize how healing it is to be remembered that way. Not as a chapter defined by conflict or regret, but as a presence defined by care. You became a place of rest in someone's memory. And rest is something people return to, even if only in thought. Sometimes they wonder if you know. If you understand the impact you had. If you realize that your gentleness mattered more than you think. But tenderness rarely announces itself. It doesn't ask to be acknowledged. It simply gives, and trusts that what is real will last, and it does. Your influence shows up in the standards they hold now. In what they will no longer tolerate. In what they quietly hope for. You raised the bar without ever trying to. You taught them that love can be steady, respectful, and kind, and that anything less should not be mistaken for depth. There is someone who feels less alone in the world because you once saw them fully. That kind of seeing doesn't fade. It becomes an inner reassurance, a reminder that they are capable of being known and cared for. Even on days when life feels isolating, that reassurance remains. You may have given tenderness without expecting anything in return. That is why it was powerful. That is why it stayed. Love that is given freely has a way of living longer than love that is demanded, and so, even now, even here, someone still thinks of you, not with regret, not with longing, but with a quiet sense of warmth. The kind that spreads gently through the chest. The kind that reminds them that goodness exists. The kind that makes the world feel a little less harsh. That is what you left behind, not a memory that hurts, but a memory that heals, and that healing memory does not fade with time, it matures. It grows softer, wiser, more rooted. What once may have been taken for granted slowly reveals its true value. Distance strips away distraction and leaves only essence. What remains of you in their mind is not a face frozen in the past, but a feeling, steady, humane, deeply kind. They no longer replay moments or conversations. Instead, they carry a quiet knowing, this is what tenderness feels like. And that knowing guides them in ways they may never consciously name. It influences how they choose partners, how they respond to conflict, how they care for themselves when no one else is watching. You gave them something internal. Something portable. Something they could take with them into every version of their future. That is why you are still remembered. Not because you stayed, but because what you offered became part of who they are. There are days when life feels heavy. When disappointment stacks upon disappointment, when people feel sharp and unreachable. On those days, they remember that there was once a place where their heart didn't have to brace itself. A place where softness was allowed. A place where being real was enough. That memory becomes a quiet refuge. You didn't rescue them from life, but you showed them how life can feel when love is gentle. And that understanding changes how much pain someone is willing to normalize. It teaches discernment. It teaches self-respect. It teaches hope, not the loud kind, but the grounded kind that survives reality. Someone still thinks of you when they notice themselves choosing patience instead of anger. When they offer reassurance instead of withdrawal. When they hold space instead of seeking control. Those moments are living proof that tenderness multiplies. It doesn't end with one person, it passes through them into the world, and even if your own tenderness was not always protected, even if being gentle cost you something, it was not in vain. What you gave did not disappear into silence. It became a standard, a comfort, a compass. You are remembered as someone who made love feel safe. That is a rare legacy. Many are remembered for excitement, for intensity, for impact that burns bright and fast. Few are remembered for calm, for steadiness, for care that didn't need to prove itself. But that is the kind of memory that lasts. You may never cross their mind in a dramatic way. You may never be spoken of in long conversations or revisited through nostalgia. Instead, you live in their instincts, in their boundaries, in their quiet refusal to accept less than kindness, and that is more enduring than presence. So if you ever question whether your softness mattered, let this be the answer. Someone carries your tenderness forward. Someone loves better because of you. Someone understands themselves more gently because you once treated them with care. You were not just a moment in their life. You were a lesson their heart keeps, and that is why, even now, even after everything, someone still thinks of you, not because they lost you, but because you showed them what tenderness truly is.